Georgetown 911, where's your emergency? Hello? 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 Son, I have nothing but gunshots. Hello? Hello?
NBA superstar Lorenzen Wright called 911 while being shot to death. That's what you just heard. There were no arrests for 8 long years until now. And the main suspect? His ex-wife, Sherra. Lorenzen Wright, the charismatic basketball star, stood nearly 7 feet tall and weighed 225 pounds. During his 13-year NBA career, the hometown hero never forgot his Memphis, Tennessee roots. The place he was born, raised, married his high school sweetheart, and played basketball through college. It was also the place he was murdered. July 18, 2010, Lorenzen flew to Memphis to visit his ex-wife, Sherra, and their 6 children. He left their home at approximately 10:30 p.m. and was never seen alive again.
Georgetown 911, where's your emergency?
The brief 911 call, mostly inaudible, was not immediately investigated. Days passed, and Lorenzen's worried mother filed a missing persons report. 8 days later, police would trace the initial 911 call and find Lorenzen's body off a backwoods road approximately 20 miles from his ex-wife's home. The coroner's report said he'd been hit by 5 bullets from 2 different guns, leaving many unanswered questions surrounding the beloved NBA star's murder. Speculation fell on his ex-wife, Sherra. She later penned a novel titled Mr. Tell Me Anything, which portrayed an abusive relationship with an unfaithful NBA-playing husband. After it was published, she met a young reporter named Kelvin Cowans, who fell hard for the 5'10" beauty. But her changing stories about her husband's disappearance and her materialism kept her on the radar as a possible suspect and ended their relationship. Then, 7 years after the murder, acting on a tip, police recovered what they believed to be the murder weapon in a murky Mississippi lake. The tip came from Jimmy Martin, a convicted murderer already serving time in prison, and Sherra Wright's cousin. It would lead to a stunning twist. Police arrested 47-year-old Billy Ray Turner, a deacon at a church where Sherra was a minister, and an ex-convict. 10 days later, Sherra would also be taken into custody. Both had been charged with first-degree murder. But the question remains, what could have motivated Sherra Wright to allegedly murder Lorenzen 5 months after they divorced? Joining me now is investigative correspondent Mara Schiavocampo. What disturbs you the most about this case? There's so many bizarre elements.
It really is such a bizarre and twisted story. But, one thing that I really don't want to lose sight of is that this was a family. Sherra and Lorenzen had 6 children together, today ranging in age from 23 to just 11 years old. First, they had to go through their parents' messy divorce. Then they go through the trauma of their father being murdered. And then their mother is arrested for that murder. The second thing that really bothers me about this is the 911 call. So as we heard, on the night that Lorenzen was killed, he called 911. They answered the call moments before his death. The dispatcher did not report that immediately to officers on patrol or to their supervisors. It took days before investigators learned about that call. Key information is lost. That's a major reason why this is a cold case. That's hard to understand.
I want everyone to hear that 911 call one more time. Scott, please play it if you don't mind.
Georgetown 911, where's your emergency? Hello? 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 Son, I have nothing but gunshots. Hello? Hello?
So what you heard were Lorenzen's last words, and no one responded to that call, as Mar just pointed out. I guess I don't understand how you wouldn't react if you think they're gunshot wounds. The operator actually says that. But let me walk you through what actually happened to him, then we'll come back and examine that. So he was found dead 9 days later in the woods. 9 days later. He had an entry wound right here, and it exited there, right? So it went in the left side, came out the right side. And then he also had a gunshot. This is behind the ear, left ear, went in this way, and it came out through the front of his mouth. Now, you can notice the front of his face is missing. There's multiple wounds to his entire body. But the investigators point out that on his left arm, there's a bullet wound, like if he put his arm up like this to defend himself. So you can recreate what happened. He's running away, he puts his hand up, they shoot his arm, he falls back, bang, bang, bang. And all this you were hearing. We heard those gunshots, most likely, in that 911 call. Any idea how many bullets were shot at him?
Well, we don't know how many, but you can hear there are several. It sounds like maybe 12 to 20. You hear them on that call. And it's kind of unfathomable that the dispatcher wouldn't have reported that call. Now, that would not have saved Lorenzen Wright's life. He would have already been dead at that time. But what it would have done is preserve key evidence, which is crucial, especially when the crime scene is outside, because this is what ended up happening. He wasn't found for several days. He was in the woods in July, in the heat. It rained, there were animals scavenging, and his body was extremely badly decomposed. And just to give you a little bit of perspective, when he played in the NBA, Lorenzen Wright was almost 7 feet tall. He battled the likes of Shaquille O'Neal. When he was discovered, his body was 57 pounds.
Think about that. Your playing weight is 225, you're down to 57 pounds. One other thing that they didn't learn from the autopsy is that there were 2 guns used. 2 guns. So we reached out to the Germantown police about why they didn't respond to Lorenzen's 911 call. They declined to comment. Our producer actually got in touch with the Germantown PD captain and the lieutenant who supervises the woman who took that call. And to our knowledge, she still works there. I'm not trying to pick on people, but this is a big misperception, because if we get that stuff happen over and over again, we'll miss more and more opportunities to help people. It's one of the reasons that this case has taken so long to solve. Let's put it on a timeline. So that call you heard was from July 2010. Lorenzen Wright is found shot to death in the woods, right? He probably wasn't shot in the woods, but he ended up in the woods. Then 4 years later, right, Sherra, the wife, ex-wife, writes a novel about an emotionally abusive, cheating NBA spouse, which she later admits was inspired by their marriage. That by itself is a bit weird,
Very
right?
bizarre.
Almost like you're tempting fate.
It's like you're telling on yourself, like you almost want people to know, but you don't want to quite confess.
Right. So this starts to happen. We'll come back to this in a second. And 3 years later, using a tip, investigators tracked down the murder weapon, right? One of those 2 guns I spoke about, which led to the arrest of Sherra Wright, the ex-wife, and a deacon at their church, and also an ex-convict, Billy Ray Turner. So now 8 years after Lorenzen was found dead, they're both charged with first-degree murder, and they have pled not guilty. So walk me through how we actually found this murder weapon after 8 years, and I don't know how it was missed for that long, and how it actually came up later on.
Yeah, this was a cold case for a very long time. One of the key reasons being because so much evidence was lost in that initial delay. The key crack in this case was the informant, Jimmy Martin. He's in jail on an unrelated crime, unrelated charge, and he makes a deal with officials. He leads them right to the murder weapon. They're able to match it to Lorenzen Wright's killing. That was what cracked this case. Otherwise, it would probably still be a cold case.
What about Sherra, the ex-wife? What is her defense? What is she saying?
She maintains that she had absolutely nothing to do with this. She denies everything that the informant, Jimmy Martin, has said about this. And her attorneys point out she has no criminal history. She says she loved Lorenzen.
And we should point out the informant is actually her cousin, I believe.
It's her cousin. And they claim that he had motive because he was negotiating his own deal on another crime. So maybe he was making things up.
Got it. So the story is as murky, perhaps, as that lake is.
Right, exactly.
Not completely clear. We reached out to Sherra's legal team on her behalf, and they said in part she has no criminal history whatsoever. So jail is a new and frightening experience, as is the possibility of spending the rest of her life in custody. She misses her children. They have 6 together with Lorenzen, and she wishes she could be with them. We also reached out to the legal teams of Jimmy Martin and Billy Ray Turner, and they did not get back to us in time for this taping. So let's talk about this book for a second. I mean, again, I don't know why people have difficulty, but if, in fact, as you know, she's alleged to have done this murder, this is sort of telling on herself. Why? Well, what insights does the book offer on her life?
It's fascinating that she would write this book years after the alleged murder took place. The book is it's a fictional book. It's fiction, but she says that 99.9% of it is based on her relationship with Lorenzen. And in the book, there's a couple that has a very volatile relationship. The husband is frequently cheating on the wife. He gets caught cheating. It's an explosive relationship. So that gives you a window into their life, because she says this was about their life. Aside from the book and separately, just about their general life together, we know that in 2005 there was a domestic abuse call that was made from their home. Officers responded. Sherra did reportedly have some cuts on her hand, abrasions on her face, but there were no arrests made, no charges ever filed.
Up next, we're going to hear from the last man to date Sherra before her arrest. He's here in a daytime exclusive interview with never before heard audio of Sherra. Stay with us. We're back talking about the murder of NBA superstar Lorenzen Wright. Police have finally made arrests after 8 years, and their prime suspect is Lorenzen's ex-wife, Sherra Wright. Joining me now is Kelvin Cowans. He had a 2-year relationship with Sherra after meeting her for an interview. So if I can start with the most obvious first question, what is it like to be in love or have been in love with a woman who's now suspected the murder of her ex-husband?
It was surreal. I got a chance to meet her, and I was blown away by her. I mean, she was beautiful, tall, funny. We connected so well. And so for it to turn to this right here, it's been very, very devastating.
Let's unwrap us a little bit. And just to be clear, everybody, Lorenzen had been dead for 5 years when Kelvin met Sherra. So this had already happened a while before. You interviewed her about the death of her husband. And this is, again, before you started dating. I'm just curious, what was your first impression of her?
My impression was that this was someone who had been wrongly accused. She cried some of the interview. And so just listening to how she talked about her kids and her community involvement, and of course she started talking about the book, and I had read the book prior to the interview. I just thought she was a good person that had, been dealt a bad hand. And I mean,
Did she talk about the reason for the divorce? Was infidelity a big factor?
Yes, she said that infidelity on Lorenzen's part was the main factor. To be specific, she said that she caught him in the family's Winnebago with his friend and a couple of strippers, and she said that was the last straw for her. And so that, and of course she said some form of reckless spending on his behalf doomed their marriage.
So you fell in love with her.
Yes.
But then 2 years later you broke off the relationship. Why?
Specifically, there was a check that came through for the estate of Lorenzen Wright. Of course, it went to the state, which his father, Herb Wright, is the executor. And so she found out about it. The check was totaling roughly about $214,000. And she found out about it. She asked me, what should I do about it? And I was like, leave the money alone. Whatever the state is going to do with it, they'll put it where they need to put it for the kids.
Sure.
And she just couldn't let that go. She wanted to go ahead and hire a lawyer to start proceedings to get some of the money. And that really just broke, our relationship up, because she was always money hungry, greedy. Like nothing was ever enough for her. And that right there was enough to let me know that I wasn't going to ever have anything with her.
You learned of the murder weapon being found.
Yes.
And let her know.
Absolutely.
How did she respond?
It was weird because I was in Memphis, and of course she was in Riverside, California at the time, so I got the news first. And so I text her, I screenshotted the message, and I text her, and I said, hey, police have found the gun that killed Lorenzen.
It's good news.
Good news, we're finna find out who killed him. You're gonna be vindicated, is what I was thinking. And of course, me and her had broken up at the time, but I still wanted the best for her. She called me about 30 minutes later, which was weird because she didn't text right back. But when she called, her mood was melancholy. It was kind of like she was wishing that the breaking news hadn't broke. And so I was like, what's going on? She was like, well, I don't think they found a gun. And I was like, they didn't find a gun? She said, I think they're making it all up and it's a setup. And I'm like, Sherra, that doesn't make sense. And so I had come to the belief that life is about having something to compare something to so that you can make a better decision.
Right.
And so up until that moment, I had nothing to compare to what I perceived as her grief. And once I got that moment and I was comparing the grief to her not being willing or being happy of the finding of the gun, that's when my journalism kicked in and I started becoming an investigator almost.
Crazy, isn't it? Investigating a woman that you were in love with for something you thought she was innocent of.
Exactly, yes.
So everyone at home should be clear about this. Sherra she's just a suspect, had not been convicted. These are allegations still. So up next, exclusive, never before heard audio of Sherra Wright grieving the loss of her ex-husband. What does it reveal? Stay with us.
I apologize. This is my last question.
Okay.
One day, we're going to turn that TV on, It's gonna say breaking news. It's gonna say arrest in Lorenzen Wright's murder.
Thank you, Jesus.
Will your name be up there? You won't be in the handcuffs.
No.
You won't be in the car.
No.
You're not gonna break our heart.
No.
That was audio from Kelvin's 2015 interview with Sherra before they started dating. So as you sit here and listen to that audio tape, do you think she was lying? Did you suspect she was lying?
At that time, I did not. At that time, no one could have convinced me that she was lying about anything that had anything to do with this murder.
When she was dating you, were there periods where her behavior was odd, where just looking back in retrospect, you might have suspected something was happening?
Yes, we had a master closet, a fairly big master closet, and 2-3 nights out of the week, Sherra would get her pillow, blanket, and go in our closet and pray and cry. And she'd do this from like 9 p.m. to like 2 or 3 in the morning. There will be times where I have to go in there and say, hey, come on, it's time to go to bed. Now, you have to understand that I'm thinking that I'm looking at grief, because like anyone else, I've lost someone that I really care about. Sure. But I've never lost anyone who was with me 30 minutes prior or 45 minutes prior. And so I thought her grief level was higher because of that. Mm-hmm. But often she would do that. And then there were the nightmares, of course. Later, I look back on the nightmares, and she never really wanted to talk about them except for one particular time. And I said, what happened? She said, well, we were back in Memphis, and we were in my old neighborhood, and he called out to me. He said, Sherra, come here. And she said, well, what do you want, Lorenzen? And he said, come here. You know I love you. She said, well, what do you want, Lorenzen? And he said, get over here. And he turned into dust as he reached out for her. And so I didn't know what to do with that nightmare.
You think it was guilt more than grief?
Looking back on it now, I can tell that she was battling with a lot of guilt. And one thing I've learned, Dr. Oz, is that grief is no indication of innocence. And that was a real hard one for me to understand. But
that's deep. Were there any what-if moments, times when you thought you may have been in danger, again, as you look back?
Definitely, because this was someone whom I was looking for a new house with. We were ring shopping, so I was looking to marry her and, take on her kids as my own. And so, respectfully, and I would have gotten life insurance, in other words, as a husband. Right. And, I mean, you killed Lorenzen, NBA player for 13 years, multi-millionaire. Who am I? What if we'd have went on hard times? Who am I,
I'm just curious to know about the family. When you talk about wanting to build a life with her, that included her children who you also lived with. Have you talked to them since all this has happened, and how are they doing now?
You have to remember that she remarried for the 3rd time. And so respectfully, I reached out to Lorenzen Jr. and I sent him a Facebook message. I just inboxed him and let him know I'm praying for you guys. He said thank you, and he appreciated me reaching out, even though we had been broken up for months at that time.
If she is guilty, what was her motivation? Why do this?
Money. It has to be the $1 million life insurance policy.
It wasn't because she snapped? You think she was a cold-blooded killer?
So you have to remember, she orchestrated trying to kill him in Atlanta, Georgia, which went awry before they actually killed him in Memphis, Tennessee about 2 months later. So that's not snapping. To me, that's cold-blooded. That's calculated. That's first-degree murder.
If you had a chance to speak to her, this woman you dated for several years, you had her right here face-to-face, what would you tell her?
How could you do that to the kids? You had 6 reasons not to do it. Mm-hmm. How could you do that? How could you take that away from them? That's what I would say.
Thank you for your honesty and for your insights, Kelvin. I appreciate it. This is still a developing case, everybody. Sherra's trial date has not been set, but her attorney says it will likely begin in the fall of 2019. We will keep a close eye on this case as it develops. Thank you for watching. Don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss out on new videos to live the good life.